Hello everyone, thank you for joining our research roundtable online. On behalf of the Department of Communication, University of Hyderabad, I welcome you. We are holding the meeting here on Zoom and live casting it on Facebook. The FB Live link will be in the chat shortly. We would like to ensure that all the interactions in this forum take place in a cordial, collegial and harassment-free environment. So kindly follow the meeting code of conduct. Please check your username and change it to your name. Turn off your microphones and videos for a smooth meeting with minimum lag. The meeting is structured as follows: introducing the speaker, presentation by the speaker, short discussion and inviting questions from the participants, live Q&A, wrap up and closing. Please remember to note your questions as the speaker is presenting. When questions are invited, raise your hand and wait for the moderator's instructions for your turn to ask. Or you could post your name, affiliation, and question to me in the chat if you would like me to ask on your behalf. Today we have with us Ms. Chinmayi Arun, and she will be engaging with the question, does the Facebook Oversight Board matter? Chinmayi ma'am is resident fellow at Yale Law School and has contributed to research as a fellow of the Berkman Klein Center of Internet and Society at Harvard University, to the Berkeley Cybersecurity Project, and to the center's work on governance and ethics of artificial intelligence. She's an alumna of the Nancy University of Law and the London School of Economics and Political Science. She served on the faculties of two of the most highly regarded law schools in India from 2010 to 2018, and was the founder director of the Center for Communication Governance at National Law University, Delhi. She's an alternative board member of the Global Network Initiative, and she is an expert affiliated with the Columbia Global Freedom of Expression Project, and a member of the executive committee of the Global Network of Center of Internet and Society. She's also a member of the United Nations Global Pulse Data Privacy Advisory Group and of UNESCO India's Media Freedom Advisory Group. She's been a consultant to the Law Commission of India and member of the Indian government's multi-stakeholder advisory group for the India Internet Governance Forum in the past. Her recent writing has focused on the impact of AI on algorithms on human rights in the global south, surveillance and the right to privacy in India, and on information gatekeeper liability in the context of internet intermediaries. Hello, Chinmayi ma'am. Welcome. Over to you, please.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this. It's such a pleasure to get to engage with all of you. And if there's one advantage of the terrible things that have been happening around the world, it is that I get to talk to you. I just want to say quickly that I'm still on the National Law University Delhi faculty. I'm just on leave. I don't want them to get worried. And so Facebook's been in the news quite a lot today, quite a lot last week. And so perhaps this is pretty topical. I don't know how many people are aware that Facebook has created this new oversight board. It's basically, so I'm going to spend a little time outlining it and explaining its significance to you. And then I thought that we would go over its main known characteristics, since the board is not operational as yet, and some of the features are changing. It's also evolving based on the kind of feedback that they're getting. And so I thought that so that we're all on the same page, we could discuss what the oversight board is and what it has to do with content moderation, how it might be relevant for content in India. And then go over the main characteristics. And then I thought we might discuss what Facebook might hope to achieve through the creation of a body like this, and how far it matters. And as we go along, I'll flag for you questions that it's helpful for people to ask as they're thinking about the oversight board. It's very new. There's parts of it that are not set in stone, which is why it's an interesting body to watch. Okay, so with the first part, sorry, and if any part of this is unclear, by the way, feel free to ask a question. I haven't read the question rules myself, and so I don't know whether you can ask directly in chat or whether Devina needs to relay it to me. But if there's any part of this that you don't follow or you want me to clarify, please feel free to ask. Okay, so the oversight board, firstly, it sits on top of Facebook's content moderation system. And it's helpful to understand that, because you'll see that a lot of commentary focuses on the board as if the board can make decisions independently. It can't. It is a part of a system that has already existed. So that's the first thing that it's important to know about Facebook. And Facebook regulates content on its platforms in what I would describe as two broad ways. So one is it implements local laws on platforms. So that's basically it's decisions that are taken place that take place only locally, which means that they don't apply outside the jurisdiction in which these decisions have made. So one example that I like to use for this is that at some point, Facebook seems to have decided that saying free Kashmir is illegal in India. Now, we all know it's not, but that was Facebook's interpretation of Indian law. Now, that meant that content saying free Kashmir would be blocked in India, but would be visible on Facebook elsewhere. So that whole system of application of national laws is not implicated at all in the oversight board. That's a different system. It's important to understand that so that we see the sphere of influence that the board has. There's a different system that Facebook uses as regards its own rules. So it applies what it thinks are national laws, and then it has its own rules for what it thinks is acceptable on its platform. And those rules are called the community guidelines. They're actually quite easy to find if anyone wants to read them. If you go online and search for community guidelines, you'll find them detailed. And over the years, they've become actually quite detailed. Facebook has extensive meetings in which they work on the language of the community guidelines. They try and get feedback, although that's not the most transparent process, as I'll discuss later, but it's you'll see that it's a system that continues to evolve. So the oversight board is concerned mainly with the application of the community guidelines. And so decisions like whether content on Facebook is hate speech or not, that can be an application of local law. If it's determined to be hate speech under Indian law, it's only blocked in India. The oversight board doesn't get into it. And if it's determined instead to be hate speech in violation of Facebook's community guidelines, then it gets blocked worldwide. And Facebook's content moderation system is concerned with it. So that's one, right? So Facebook has its own rules. You might think of it as almost like Facebook's legislation, where they use community guidelines to decide what they're going to permit globally on the platform. Now, when you have a set of rules that discuss what kind of content can be blocked, the next question that arises is, well, what if they overblock? What if it's easier for them to designate most things as hate speech, and what if they take it down? So to counteract that, Facebook has this other thing that they've announced, which they call values. And that contains things like voice, authenticity for some reason. And so they've got a set of values that operate almost the way of fundamental rights might, right? So they try to hold on to the values in their application of the community guidelines, and they've been quite explicit that out of that, freedom of expression, which they call voice, is the main value as far as they're concerned. And that's really the system that the oversight board is concerned with, and I'll explain how. So every time there's a piece of content on Facebook that violates community guidelines, say it's something that some people might describe as hate speech. Perhaps I could use an example that took place a few years back in India, which is Jazz Club in Delhi announced an event that had the title Bhangi Jumping. Now, a lot of people were furious about that page being listed on Facebook, saying that this is casteist hate speech. At the time, Facebook's conception of race did not include caste. And so it was difficult for them to understand that the application of the rule over here would necessitate recognizing caste as a part of their racist speech. I understand that they may have changed this now. So now when you're making the decision of whether to take this piece of content down or not, there is the question of freedom of expression on one hand, and there were a number of people arguing freedom of expression. And then on the other hand, is this hate speech of sufficient seriousness that it qualifies under Facebook's rules for a takedown and justifies the suppression of freedom of expression. So that's the kind of decisions that you have to make once the rules are in front of you, right? So the value over here is freedom of expression or voice. And the rule being applied is that Facebook does not permit hate speech on its platform. So now how does Facebook implement this system? What they've got with them is a system involving both human and algorithmic moderators. You perhaps remember a period in which when the pandemic had started and most people couldn't go to work suddenly, right? It all happened very fast. There was a period in which the content moderation on Facebook was happening very strangely. There was a lot of news about odd content being censored on Facebook or being left up. And the reason that happened was that there was a period in which the human moderators couldn't work because they had to go to office and use secured machines to do the moderation. And so it was the algorithms that were in charge. And we all got basically a ringside view of what happens if the human moderation is taken out of the picture. And so in implementing the rules, there's a system that involves humans making an assessment of whether content actually violates Facebook's rules or not. And as I understand it, it's a two-tier system. And then algorithms are used to try and implement the decisions that the humans make at scale. Because as you know, one image that qualifies as terrorist or hate speech might go viral on the platform, and it's difficult to wait and identify each instance of it. So if you know what you're looking for, or you know that specific words are just racist, then you can use an algorithm to find them and take them down. So that's how implementation happens. And then of course, as Facebook started discussing this system, which was actually not immediately, it took a little while before these rules became more and more elaborate. And Facebook started coming up with increasingly elaborate systems for their implementation. People started objecting, saying that, look, sometimes we don't agree with your decisions. So what are we supposed to do? And that's when Facebook introduced a system for appeals. Now, the thing with appeals is that that's also a slightly opaque process in which you can appeal the decision, but then the decision about what to do with the appeal is again made internally within Facebook. So as you can see, this is an entirely private system where the company makes the rules, the company implements the rules, and the company decides whether users' objections to how the rules have been implemented are justified or not. Now, there's two ways of looking at this, right? You might say it's a private company and it can decide what's on its platform or not. In the early days, in fact, when one had conversations with Facebook about the community guidelines, some of the guidelines were quite unsuitable, one might say, for a country like India, right? So they would say, well, we're an American company and, this is a community and we're using norms that we see as community norms on our platform. But that got complicated because there's a point at which the number of Indians on Facebook basically was more than people from anywhere else in the world. And so then one had to go back to them and say, look, your community is really mostly Indian. And so you can't ignore, I won't say Indians' social norms because we know that that's not simple, but you can't ignore the impact of your rules in India just because that is the sizable mass of the people on Facebook. So as you can see, it's a long drawn process, and it's had to change several times on the way. The other thing is that it also wasn't a process that was discussed very much in public in the beginning. And it's as the company expanded and as speech on the platform got salient and very obviously started having effects on societies, that the platform was forced to start engaging with people. So the oversight board basically sits on top of this system. You have the rules, the implementation, the appeals. And then there's been a space in which there was a lot of criticism of Facebook about how it made its decisions. Prominently, you may have seen that there's been an India hate speech case in the news recently, and that's a part of the kind of publicity that Facebook has been getting for its decisions about speech. And so there was a point at which Facebook said, okay, we're going to see if we can introduce independent experts in its decision making. And this has been, again, after a lot of conversations with experts around the world, they decided that what they want to do is set up an oversight board that sits on top of the system and introduces some amount of independent expertise in how these content decisions are made. So I'm now going to go to the next part so that we can see how far the oversight board does this. What are the main features of the oversight board? So this is what we've been told about the oversight board. One is that it's independent. It's been described initially as a Supreme Court. It has 40 members. It's international. And so this is significant as well. It's a system that has explicitly been constructed bearing in mind that Facebook has an international usership and the effects of its content decisions are global, and it can give recommendations to Facebook. So I'm going to discuss some of these now. One is the question of independence. So that comes next. Facebook has invested quite a lot of money in trying to make the board independent. So I'll discuss what we know about that. It's no longer described as a Supreme Court. In the initial announcements, it was, but now that's not the language that's being used for it. I'm skipping the 40 members. We know 20 of the 40 members, and I'll discuss that a little bit, but mainly in the context of how international is it. And then we know that it is the final forum for user appeals of content moderation decisions. And that's also helpful to look into, just because not all users will get to the oversight board. And I'll try and discuss that a bit if we have time. And the last is that the oversight board, on one hand, deals with user appeals, but it also has another function which is quite key, which is that it offers recommendations to Facebook. And so if Facebook brings questions before the oversight board saying, tell us what to do, the oversight board is required to give those questions attention, as I understand it. And that's important because the oversight board has limited capacity. When we discuss the people that are on it, you'll see that they aren't people that are going to be doing this full time. And you'll see that each case is going to be complex, which means that the oversight board has a limited number of cases that it can handle. And so one of the questions we may want to ask in the future is what proportion of those cases are really user appeals? So beginning with some of the questions, with some of the salient features of the oversight board, one is that it's in the question of independence. So if you look up the oversight board, you'll see that Facebook's created a trust and it's put a substantial amount of money in the trust to enable a few years of functioning of the oversight board. Now, the trust is run by independent trustees who make all decisions related to the oversight board once it's up and running. The board has its own staff. Prominently, the executive director of Article 19 was hired to be the executive director of the Facebook Oversight Board. The board's membership committee will select new board members, even though Facebook has been involved in the selection of the older board members. It's been a process involving the trustees and a number of international consultants. And what they're looking for is a model in which the trustees make all the major decisions. So the funds that have been given to the oversight board, they're an irrevocable gift, which means that Facebook can't take it back. And that means for the next few years of functioning, the board is financially independent. It's a separate legal entity, and it's able to make its own decisions as far as we know. I do want to flag one thing over here, which is that it is independent for the years for which the irrevocable gift will cover it. What comes after that, what happens to the board staff and to the future functioning of the board, we're not absolutely sure because it's not a taxation-based system, right? It's a single gift with limited tenure. But that said, to be fair, it's also an experiment, and it makes sense that the company would want to see how it goes before investing more funds in it. So 20 members of the oversight board have been announced. Several of them are prominent known figures, especially in the context of human rights. I did a breakdown so that you could see how international the board is. The idea, it was not possible, of course, to represent every country that is on Facebook, but the idea was to reflect its geographic spread somewhat, so that when the oversight board members are applying the community guidelines, they come with varied expertise and with varied understandings of contexts around the world. And so I took the board members and I did a rough breakdown so that you could see how many members are from where. And so this is the breakdown. And as you can see from this, 11 members are from what one might call first world countries or the global north. And that's out of that, 5 members are from the US. And out of the members in the US, 4 of them are professors. And 1 is from a major think tank. There are 2 European, but I've also added to that the 1 Israeli, who is possibly the only one other than the former prime minister who's previously worked for government. I've also added, so there's 1 member who is both Cameroon and France, but she's been based in France quite a lot. So I've also added her as sort of partially France. And then we've got 2, of course, from Australia and the UK. And as you can see, they're again quite prominent. And at the bottom, I've listed all the countries from which we have 1 member each. Some of them are professors, several of them are journalists, activists, or lawyers. In its initial conception, the idea was to try and make the board contain as many people with legal expertise as possible, just because they're applying rules in a manner that's quite familiar to lawyers. But it is a fairly interdisciplinary mix if you look at it. As in terms of it being seen as a final forum for appeal, it's important to know that 1 is, of course, as I said, national laws. The application of national laws don't even enter the purview of the oversight board. And so if Facebook continues to interpret Free Kashmir as a violation of Indian law, that would not go before the board. 2 is that not all user appeals can go before the board, in part because it's constrained by the volume of cases that it can hear. And so they're going to have a board subcommittee that decides which cases will be heard by the board. At the moment, users can only appeal situations in which their content has been taken down, and not when they've reported something like hate speech and it's not been taken down. But as I understand it, that's likely to change next year. And then the other thing that I understand from this is that Facebook can bring its questions before the board, and those would be given priority. Currently, Facebook can bring questions of whether it should take down content before the board. So for example, the major hate speech question that the media has been discussing in the context of Facebook, the person that reported that speech or that speaker as dangerous cannot contest the fact that it's not been taken down. But Facebook can go and ask the oversight board whether that was the right decision to make, if it chooses to. Okay, so then this is an expensive and elaborate exercise, right? So why set it up? The reason was that increasingly Facebook and other social media platforms, but especially Facebook because of its size, they were being seen as the arbiters of speech. And so the idea was, well, you're making these decisions and where does your credibility come from? There are many authors that argue that it should be constitutional courts that make these decisions, and whoever makes them, it should not be Facebook. But the fact of the matter is that because there was a sizable amount of hate speech on Facebook and other kinds of dangerous and harmful speech, the company was making these decisions. Carlton Gillespie had written about this, and he pointed out that in many ways, moderation is the service that social media companies provide, because there's just so much content online that someone needs to sift through it and sort of find you, firstly, what you want to see, but also weed out content that you don't want to see. So there's that. But Facebook was being confronted by what you might call hard questions. And one of the major ones there was, of course, the question, for example, of what to do with the napalm girl. And so I've got one of the headlines that came up in the context of the napalm girl controversy here in this picture. So, you know, the napalm girl picture, if you just look at it objectively, would violate the platform's child pornography policies, right? But there's a huge controversy because it's an iconic and award-winning picture. And so that is the kind of question that lawyers like to describe as hard questions, where working out how the rules apply is not easy because there are countervailing arguments, and you have to sift through them to come come to a decision. So one of the ways in which having a board of international experts that understand speech norms is useful is that they're able to help the company parse hard questions. And the last reason, of course, which one imagines may have been a major reason why Facebook chose to do this, is legitimacy. That Facebook was under fire, and as you can see, continues to be, for decisions that it makes in the application of its community guidelines. And to have this panel of renowned international experts helping make these decisions, the idea was that it would make Facebook's system of content moderation more legitimate. And so that brings us to, sorry, does it matter? And the reason I've got this this cat picture, apart from you're probably tired of listening to me and it's a good break, is also to show you that the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And that's really, that I would say is the final answer to this question. But I want to wrap up by raising questions that arise in the context of the board, right? So one is that it's interesting because for all forms of media so far, print, broadcast, there have been models of how they're regulated. And, you know, that's things like press councils. With broadcast media, there are state regulators and there's models of self-regulation. And so the oversight board is really, it's a new model of self-regulation. I've got a blog post on this that I can share with anyone that's interested. And it's an interesting model in that it's independent. The decisions are not being made entirely by Facebook in some respects, not about the questions that come up before the board, but as I showed you, it sits on top of a system that is controlled quite a lot by Facebook. It's got impact potentially at scale. And so if the board makes path-breaking decisions on how hate speech or terrorist content should be treated on Facebook, and if those decisions are implemented, we might see this board of experts actually affecting how speech is moderated at scale around the world, because it's finally Facebook is listening to a set of experts that are conferring with each other. And so it's not consulting them independently. And that has a lot of potential. I think one has to grant that. I think we might learn quite a lot by following the board and its reasoning on how to deal with this kind of content. The other thing is that the trust is structured in a way in which if other platforms should choose to join the system, they might be able to. That might be interesting too, to see how this goes as a model of regulation. But that said, there are a few things about the board that are still causes for concern. One is that the mandate of the board is to implement Facebook's rules, and both in terms of rights and in terms of the rules that are being applied, they're both sets come entirely from Facebook. Now the community guidelines, they've always existed, but a lot of people, including the UN Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Expression, had recommended to Facebook that it should use the international human rights framework rather than coming up with its own values to protect rights. For whatever reason, the company didn't choose to do that, even though it has referenced international human rights quite a lot in how it talks about the board. There was a BSR study on the human rights. It was a human rights assessment of the board, and they've also flagged that it would have been helpful if Facebook, and more credible if Facebook had applied international human rights law rather than using its own standards. But so that is one of the problems with the system from the get-go. Two, as I keep telling you, is that local laws remain untouched. And so there'll be a lot of decisions that Facebook is making in countries around the world that the board cannot get into. Three, again, as I told you, there's the concern of what happens when the money runs out. And I think that a lot of that will depend on the kind of impact that the board has. And the last, which is going to be interesting, is that, so the cases are often assigned to panels within the board. And I believe that then they go up to the entire board for approval. While board members give reasons for their decisions, or will give reasons for their decisions, they cannot offer their individual reasoning. As in they can't sign their names to it. They can offer reasoned dissent if they wish to. The reason for this, as I understand it, is to protect the board members, because a lot of these decisions will make people angry. But it's quite different from how courts work. So one of the reasons that courts have legitimacy is that judges sign their name and put their own personal credibility at stake every time they make a decision. That the board is not going to function in that manner. My last slide was supposed to say thank you, but I hope that you'll accept the cat as the thank you. I think I've run out of time, so I might stop here, but please feel free to ask me questions, not just about the board, but about the content moderation system, and I'll do my best to answer.
Thank you so much, Mahima. Your presentation focused on Facebook's new oversight board for monitoring and regulating content posted on its global platform. You spoke about the significance of the board in an environment that demands innovation and social media self-regulation. We'll have live questions from the Zoom meeting participants shortly. And I will ask you all the Facebook Live and Zoom chat questions together towards the end of the meeting. So I request participants to raise their hands, and I will announce your names in order. You will find the raise hand option next to your username. Or please scroll down to the bottom of the screen to the Zoom activity controls and click on participants. You will find the raise hand icon there below the participants' usernames. For some reason, if you can't raise your hand, please let me know via personal message that you would like to ask a question, and we'll invite you live. Kindly turn on your microphone and or video depending on your connection when it is your turn to ask. Please keep your questions as brief as possible so we can have maximum interaction with the speaker. And we will be taking questions starting now for the next 10 minutes only to manage time better. So we already have a few people who've raised their hands. Siddharth, if you could please unmute yourself and come on video.
Yeah, hi. Am I audible?
Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, Chinmay. My question was, the limited context I've looked at this subject, for example, is using like a trustee system for content moderation is for Facebook. I was wondering if, because these trustee models are kind of popping up everywhere, so I was wondering if what you thought of functions other than content moderation. Let's say, do you like when you see the structure, do you feel a sense of I don't know, faith in it? Do you think it'll work? Do you think they could do things other than content moderation? Was my question, or how applicable they could be?
What kind of functions are you thinking of? Well, firstly, hi, Siddharth. It's very good to see you. But what kind of questions are you thinking of other than content moderation?
So mainly I'm thinking of decision making on data governance, basically. Some kind of delegated decision making. Basically, could they be sector specific? If they were trained for sector specific governance, let's say, would that be of some use? That's like a good model to look at.
That's a very interesting idea. I hope that you plan to write about it. I think data governance right now, the trouble is that it's very central to the business model of the company. And it's not got the kind of public pushback that content moderation decisions have. And part of the reason, of course, is that it's not public enough for people to know exactly what they should be worried about. And so I don't see that happening in the foreseeable future, but I think that if the company comes under enough pressure, specifically in the form of threat of government regulation, then we might see them considering this. For this oversight board is going to focus entirely on content moderation, but I understand that you're asking about it as a model for other things also. You should write the paper.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Siddharth. Yes, next we have Usha ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, Chinmay, for laying that out. I have two questions, not necessarily related. One kind of relates to what Siddharth just asked, in the sense, content moderation, from what I understood from your presentation, the appeals come mostly from the content, that is the speech itself, right? But is there also a role for such a board to look at the process of moderation in terms of, whether it is human or algorithmic? Are they at liberty, or is that one of the things that they look at in terms of how either moderation is decided or how it might be scaled? So that's the first question. The second is, in terms of the composition of the board, is there any modality by which the representativeness of such a board can be debated? I mean, I don't know how this works, but is there any space for that discussion? Yeah.
Both excellent questions, Usha ma'am. Thank you. It's not clear at the moment whether the board can get into questions of process. And actually, it's interesting because the recent Facebook controversy in India is actually all about process. In all of the discussions that I have been a part of, the actual decision making, and particularly questions of how far country affairs people are given an input on the decision making, that's not always been entirely clear. As I understand it, the board will get more information than the public is offered. So they are supposed to get access to more proprietary content than any of us is ever going to see. And so an optimistic way of looking at this would be that if a decision comes before the board about a piece of content, ideally, I would think that they would be able to ask about the process of how that decision was made. I don't know if they can change the process. Perhaps they can at best recommend changes, but I would have to go back and look at the documents, but the last time I read them, it didn't look like process came within their purview of decision making, but I do want to double check to be absolutely sure. So that's a part of it. I know that Facebook can bring questions before the board, but of course, in a context in which they want to make a business interests assessment, will they bring that question before the board? I don't, that's really the conflict between how far will they go to make the board credible. Would it be even at a cost to Facebook's own business interests? That's a question for the company. The second is that, I'm not sure how they decided what the composition of the board would look like. I suspect it's in part kind of reaching out to experts that they were able to vet and see as credible. And the thing is that if you look at quite a lot of the experts on the board, I think it's quite apparent that several of them have spent time in the US or are based in the US or in Europe. And I believe that the reason for that might be just that it was easier for them to identify these people and have them vetted. Second thing is that there are a number of people that were probably asked that declined to be considered. And of course, we're never going to know who they are. But where would you raise the questions? I know that before they appointed the board members, they had places where the public could give inputs. Apart from the town halls that they held across the world, you could send them inputs about how you felt about the representation. But I do think that it's really, perhaps it's our task to write about the composition of the board and to flag areas in which one feels that it's too tilted one way or the other. So I noticed, for example, that when the board was, they defined independence as saying no Facebook employees or former Facebook employees, etc. But in their criteria, they haven't said no board members who currently have Facebook funding. And so I think that there are questions that could be asked.
Yeah, or even if they have own Facebook stock, for instance, that sort of thing. But I'm sorry, Devina, if I may just add a little rider to that. I was also wondering, could such a board evolve criteria like ethics boards do? That you have to have somebody from a legal background, someone with a religious background, etc. I mean, that might be one way such boards could progress.
That they've been debating through their public consultations. I know that the opinions on this have been varied. So Noah Feldman, whose idea it was initially, just wanted to staff the board with lawyers. But a lot of the feedback that they got was that people wanted, journalists and others on the board. I don't know if they're still accepting feedback. I'll check. But they've got a report from their consultation process that discusses this particular question that might be useful.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Next, we have Nikhil Pava. If you could just go ahead.
Thanks. Thanks, Devina. And hi, Chinmay. Good to see you. One of my questions you've answered about the fact that there isn't clarity about how much power does the local team have in decision making. But just as a follow-up to that, I wanted to understand if there's any clarity on how much visibility local teams have on the content that's being moderated by the content moderation teams. That was one question. I had two short questions outside of that. One is about the local language capabilities of both content moderation teams, as well as how this works from an oversight board perspective, given that India has multiple languages. And lastly, in terms of the algorithms, do they look at words or do they look at phrases when they're moderating content? And how much do we know about that? Thanks.
I'll do my best to answer that, Nikhil. Hi, it's very good to see you and thank you for coming. So after the recent Wall Street Journal story, it's been my question of how far the local teams are involved in decision making. I know this much that it's not the local teams that make the final decision on the implementation of community guidelines. But honestly, even I was surprised to learn that they have input. When I was discussing the opacity of the implementation process, the thing is that the Facebook has never discussed the degree to which local teams are involved and therefore the capacity in which they're involved. So this is a really good question that you ask, that if it's India related content, do they proactively tell the local teams that they're looking at it and do they seek their input? It's not known. Can a local team choose to access information about a content moderation decision? We don't know the answer to that question. The other model is possibly that do they have specified people in local teams, maybe experts on hate speech that they reach out to for local knowledge? Not known. Or is it that the head of that the senior most person in the local team in a particular country is the person that gets the final say? These are questions that are really unclear, and I do hope that Facebook tries to discuss them as far as is possible. I know that they've expressed concerns in the past that their staff may be under threat if the identities of who is involved are discussed. But since we've got an illustration of how local input can sway these decisions, I think it's only fair that they discuss to some degree how far their input is solicited and whose specifically. That answers a part of your question. The content
the other one
moderation,
was on local language capability of both the content moderation team as well as the oversight board.
So the local language, I know that they do try and acquire experts that deal with local language as far as possible, and so I imagine that a language like Hindi they would be able to handle. A slightly rarer language would be more difficult for them, but they. In their public communications, they have always indicated that they make efforts to get people who understand local language, and they plan to do the same with the board. So when they're assessing content in local languages, they plan to work with experts that understand the local languages. They've been quite explicit about that also in their public communications. So I think that's something that they've said that they're willing to sink resources into. The last one that you asked about was algorithmic content moderation.
Yes.
I've not, to be fair, I've never asked the question of do they do words or phrases, but I do remember a story in which someone had said that there are some words that you cannot publish. if you type them into Facebook. They won't enter the platform at all because they can't be used. I don't know if that applies for phrases. I think it's best to ask a machine learning expert, but I imagine that it would be possible to flag a phrase if it's been found as potentially hate speech. Again, if I remember correctly, Facebook has said that it tries to have human moderators look at whatever the algorithm flags, just to make sure that what's being taken down it fits the bill. But I think it probably depends on the kind of content we're talking about. So content, like pictures, they're hashed, and so if an image matches exactly an image that was flagged as content that's not allowed on Facebook, then that's quite easy to identify, as long as it's not changed.
And the human moderators are effectively training the algorithm.
Perhaps they are, yeah, to an extent.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Chinmay.
Thank you so much. Next, we have a live question from Madhavi ma'am. If you could please unmute yourself and come on video if you're connected to us.
Hi, Chinmay. Thanks for the nice presentation. I lost some part of your presentation. I don't know whether you covered this or not. My question is the oversight board is empowered to make binding and independent decisions on many of the most challenging content issues on Facebook and Instagram? For example, and are they committed to protect users and holding Facebook accountable in this?
Ma'am, I'll have to check about Instagram. The oversight board has declared its commitment to make these decisions, but I did, as I said at some part of in my presentation, not all users will be able to go before the oversight board. So if a user appeal should be selected by the board's committee as a case that the board will hear, then the board's decision is something that Facebook is committed to upholding. But I think that the question is which cases and how many cases will the board be able to look at, if that's helpful.
Thank you.
Next, we have a question on Facebook comments. I'm just putting it in chat here, Chinmay, for everyone to see. It's by Al Yusuf, head of UNESCO Southern and Eastern Africa region, and he's thanking you for your presentation. And then he goes on to ask you if you could explain how Facebook, which is managed as a private sector entity, with its own leadership, management structure, already there are existing subscribers to various national legislative frameworks. How can it then subscribe to this interesting proposition, which in his opinion is more of a voluntary approach, on a voluntary basis? Don't you think it will be better to advocate for change of national legislative framework governing leadership in internet intermediaries such as Facebook for better enforcement of the proposed oversight boards?
Alameen, thank you for showing up. I only wish that you were on Zoom so that I could say hello in person. That's a great question. I think that Facebook's concern has been that there's a limited degree to which they're able to engage with national governments. And I think part of their worry has been that national governments seem to want different things in the context of speech. And so perhaps that's why they've come up with what you correctly describe as almost a voluntary model to work out the way in which they apply their own rules. I believe that the most optimistic people looking at this system have suggested that if the system becomes legitimate and works in a way that the large number of Facebook users or the public in general find legitimate, then that may be a good argument to have this sort of independent expertise-driven model mediate some of the ways in which Facebook manages laws in various countries. But I think currently the concern is that if they were to follow national legislations, that would end up being quite speech restrictive. The other alternate model, which I should introduce since I never spoke about it in the presentation, was that Article 19 was contemplating what they call social media councils, like press councils, to hold the platforms to applying international human rights standards. And that would be across the board, regardless of national laws. And so that's another interesting model to consider, because that engages directly with national laws in the manner that you suggest, without leaving it to governments to negotiate with each other, but kind of more saying that this particular application of a national law would actually violate international human rights. But thank you for asking. It's a fantastic question.
Thank you so much. So since we have a little bit of time, I'd like to squeeze in a question of my own, if that's okay. Facebook has had its share of controversy in India. I mean, whether it was, I think back in 2015 when Free Basics was introduced, or the recent Ankhi Das BJP hate speech controversy. So I'm wondering if something like Facebook Oversight Board will work as effectively as it seems to be on paper in a country like India. So, I mean, we already have a very strong right-wing trolling or social media machinery that is active. And we already see a lot of hate speech on Facebook, and I know it's not part of this talk, but Instagram, Twitter, WhatsApp, and we actually have seen real life implications of these hate speech content related issues, like lynchings, for instance, or the recent demolition, and then now we also have a temple there. So those kind of things. So I mean, in a way, this question has been asked in terms of regulation or language or things like those. But if I were to ask you, without the rules and regulations, how far do you think an oversight board in India is going to work? And what can you see? Like, what can be things that people can do, citizens can do? Is it some sort of campaigning that we can do? Because, okay, I'm all over the place, I'm sorry. But, as they say, the left can't meme. So people have to, in a way, meme on behalf of the left and things like those. So, yeah.
Thank you. I think that's a great question. Like I said, there's a lot. It's hard to speculate about how effective or not the board will be, in part because we literally do not know how they're going to operate, right? But so one is that it's quite apparent that Facebook responds to public pressure, but specifically public pressure from the US media. And so we've known that hate speech in India is of major concern for I don't know how many years now. And I've had many conversations with Facebook staff about it. And they've always acknowledged that it's of concern, but it's interesting because this Wall Street Journal story is gaining huge traction, in part because of where it's been published. It was the same with Myanmar. It was going on for several years before the New York Times picked it up. It's only when the New York Times picked it up and the UN got into it that Facebook started being responsive. And so I think that's a reality that we may need to acknowledge when thinking about ways to engage with a company. So that's a part of it. I think that they are working on getting local language capacity, in part because we are their biggest market. But you asked the question very tactfully, but maybe I'll get into it less tactfully. The part of the Wall Street Journal story that surprised me was the degree to which business interests plays a role in making content moderation decisions. And the reason for that is, if you look just a month before, Nick Clegg, who holds title of vice president in Facebook, wrote a letter, an open letter, saying that Facebook has no business interest in allowing hate speech to exist on its platform. And I think that the Wall Street Journal story made it very clear that that's not true. Now, if Facebook does have a business interest to consider in permitting hate speech on its platform, then I think that we should be asking them difficult questions as one of its biggest markets in which hate speech is of serious concern, how they balance their business interest with the question of hate speech. Because in principle, globally, in all of their public documentation, they declare that they're committed to removing hate speech from their platform. And then we hear this internal story of how the question of business interest does come up. And by the way, every time I've asked the question, I've always been told that that plays no role in the designation of hate speech. And so if the question does come up, then if Facebook wants to regain credibility in how it implements its community guidelines, it's going to have to engage with the question, as Nikhil. It's also what Nikhil asked. What is the degree to which they're involved? And the fact that we don't know, I think, is going to undermine Facebook's credibility, oversight board or not, unless the oversight board comes out with a decision that makes it clear that they look into the process of that we're all asking. That's an open question, and I want to step up and establish its own credibility by doing this.
I honestly believe that it's got to have a lot of gears moving in tandem together. We need to have at the individual level that literacy that makes us see what is going wrong where. We need self-regulation by platforms, and I don't know, somewhere down the line, if it gets too big, maybe governance can come in as well. And I suppose the antitrust lobby for organizations like Facebook is not wrong, where they cite certain concerns that Facebook is really getting too big as a company. Ma'am, if you don't mind, we have one more question that's just come in a minute ago on Facebook comment. It's by a student of UOH. I'm just putting it here. Yes, Vamsi Krishna Puturu from UOH, from our department, is asking, where does Facebook's collaboration with fact-checking initiatives stand in this hierarchy of oversight board on the top to local content moderation teams? So I think he's trying to place organization communication with oversight.
That would again play into Facebook's decision making. I think if you wanted the answer to that question, I would check and see. So as far as I understand it right now, the oversight board will only be looking at cases in which Facebook has taken down content that users appeal, and separately questions that Facebook might ask it, right? And so Facebook can ask it a broader spectrum of questions than users can bring before it. If all Facebook does is flag content, as platforms sometimes do, as potentially not true, or maybe you want to go read this, I don't believe that would come within the oversight board's purview, as I can currently understand it. But if Facebook takes something down, then a user can appeal and take it to the oversight board.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So I believe this is all the time that we have today for Research Roundtable Online. Thank you so much, Chinmay ma'am.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you for having me, and thank you all for engaging and for asking really difficult questions.